Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the Bear Creek Arsenal 7.62 by 39 side charging upper receiver. But before we get into the video, if you'd like to help out the channel, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe, as all that sort of stuff is free and does actually help us out quite a bit. Go ahead and comment literally anything down below. On top of that, there's my website, which will have things in stock very soon. Not this weekend. I'm actually going to be gone this weekend, but after I get back early next week, basically everything should be restocked. So you might want to go on there and go ahead and sign up for the out of stock notifications to be notified when things come back in stock. On top of that, there's Subscribestar, where I will actually be giving away one of these, or actually this upper receiver right here. Now it will be already given away by the time that this video goes live, so you cannot win it, but that is again just something that I do for the Subscribestar guys. So if you want to be entered in some cool giveaways in the future, go ahead and check that out. Now, with all of that out of the way, full disclosure on the Bear Creek Arsenal 7.62 by 39 Gen 2 side charging upper receiver is that they did send this upper receiver out to me. This is the same upper receiver that I did a first shot video a couple months ago. I did about 300 rounds just straight out of the box just to see how it would perform. And now this is the follow-up full 1,000 round, or in this case, a little bit over 1,000 round review. Now, Bear Creek Arsenal has sent me a lot of stuff to review in the past. I've also bought a lot of stuff from them, but I did not pay for this upper receiver whatsoever. They did send this out to me. I also have a discount code for them. It is not an affiliate code, so I don't make any money from them whatsoever. There's no money changing hands in any way, shape, or form with Bear Creek Arsenal. And again, I'm giving away this upper receiver, so it's not like I'm selling it afterwards either. But again, there has been a fairly long-term relationship there, so go ahead and keep that in mind. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the specifics on the upper receiver. Now, the most important part of this upper is going to be the barrel. The barrel is a 16-inch, 7.62 by 39. It is made out of 4150 chrome moly steel, which is a very good steel, a very decent steel. And it is unfortunately parkerized finished, which is probably the lowest tier. It's probably the least corrosion resistant, scratch resistant, so on and so forth. It does work as a coating, but again, it's probably the lowest tier of coating. Now, the barrel profile is a heavy profile, and it is a very heavy profile. I believe the barrel itself weighs about 3.2 pounds, so it is extremely heavy, which will benefit us in terms of shootability and accuracy, but we'll get into that when we actually talk about the overall weight of the upper receiver. If I didn't mention it, the barrel is a 1 in 10 twist, which for 7.62 by 39 is pretty decent. You should be able to stabilize just about anything. In terms of accuracy, we did throw anything from 115 to 220 grains through it for accuracy testing, and it did perform quite well. Now, the muzzle device that they include on basically all of their upper receivers now is this A1 style of flash hider, if you will. It's their spiral flash hider. Does a decent job of hiding flash, not anything exceptional by any means, but it is fairly aesthetically pleasing and it does work. And of course, it doesn't push the muzzle down like some other muzzle devices do. Now, getting into the charging handle and of course the bolt, because they are one component basically on this. So you do of course have the Gen 2 charging handle, which is this very nice kind of extended and machined piece of steel that hangs off the side of your bolt, and by virtue of hanging off the side of your bolt also acts as a forward assist. Now, the downside of this is a fairly dirty running upper receiver because the barrel is fairly overgassed, which we'll get into in just a minute. And to clean and disassemble is a little bit more of an issue and not something you can just do if you don't have the tools on hand. Because of course, if you remove the plug here in the rear to take out the bolt, the charging handle itself stops you from taking it out of the upper receiver. So before we take it out of the upper receiver, we might as well talk about the upper receiver itself. It is a chunk of 7075 T6 aluminum. It is a billet upper receiver by virtue of the very extended cutouts here on the side. Now, the upper receiver itself is also something that is very blocky. There's not a ton of machining done to it, which is how they're able to keep the price fairly low. Now, the price on these upper receivers, I want to say, is $250, which is probably the cheapest or one of the cheapest complete upper receivers on the market. Bear Creek Arsenal has basically always been either at the lowest or like one step above the lowest price in terms of a complete upper receiver. And some of the ways that they achieve that low price is by one, manufacturing basically everything in-house, and also doing as little machining work as possible. So I do forget the exact weight on the upper receiver, but it is something like twice as heavy as a standard forged upper receiver, and that will play into the weight discussion a little bit later on. Now, the charging handle itself, as you can see, is a very nicely machined piece of steel. It has a steel dowel that inserts into the bolt, and then a single cross bolt that then threads into the bolt carrier itself. Now, in the Gen 1 side charger, it didn't have this dowel on it, and it was basically just a straight line with a single bolt, and it would always come loose. Fortunately, on the Gen 2s, all three of the Gen 2s that I've owned, I have never had the bolt or the charging handle ever come loose or try to walk itself out, which is nice, of course, because if the charging handle were to ever work its way off of the carrier, the gun would essentially become inoperable. And now that we have that out, we can, of course, take the bolt carrier out completely. Now, the bolt carrier group is another area where Bear Creek Arsenal can kind of cut down on some of the costs and machining. The carrier itself is 8620 and the bolt is 9310. Now, I have not cleaned this whatsoever since I've got it. This is only the second time that I've ever taken it out just to look it over and make sure that it's okay. Well, actually, technically the third time because the extractor broke on it, but we will talk about that in just a minute. But in terms of its cleaning and lubrication, basically throughout the review process, a couple times I added in some extra lubrication just to make sure that it kept running. Now, I have also ran it suppressed for only a couple hundred rounds, maybe 250 rounds suppressed. So most of the time it was run unsuppressed, and there really isn't too much carbon buildup overall. Now, it is a very nasty, gross bolt carrier group because AR-15s do tend to run very, very dirty. Now, that doesn't really tend to become an issue with most of them until you're at, like, say, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 rounds without actually cleaning them. But in this instance, it wasn't an issue either because, again, we didn't really clean it. We just added lubrication during the first 1,000 rounds. Now, getting into the carrier itself, on the side, you'll notice you have, of course, a completely different profile because it is a side charging upper receiver. Therefore, it does not need to accommodate a dust cover in any way, shape, or form. You'll notice instead of radiusing the corners here and having a nice curve to the sides like you would in a normal AR-15, on the Bear Creek Arsenal bolt, it's literally just straight lines, so it's almost hexagonal instead of circular like you would have on a normal carrier. And that is, again, what I imagine just to be a little bit easier. It's probably 1 or 2 less processes in a CNC machine. It's less machining work in general, which means that it's faster and therefore cheaper to produce. Now, as far as the Nitride Finish itself goes, it's just fine. Bear Creek Arsenal's Nitride is nothing special by any means, but it's not terrible either. The coating itself has worn off where you would expect it. So on all 4 of the rails on the BCG itself, or sorry, on the carrier itself, and then on both sides of the gas key, as well as starting to remove on the actual face of the carrier, the bolt face as well, and on the back of the lugs. In fact, on the back of the lugs, you can see somewhat, I wouldn't say excessive wear, but you can definitely see where the corners themselves are starting to lose some material and round out, which is fairly common on AR-15 bolts in general, but it's definitely noticeable on the Bear Creek Arsenal bolt. Overall, the bolt and carrier, they're just fine. They're very standard, not the carrier itself, but the bolt, all the geometry there is fairly standard. There's nothing really special about it. The one downside of the carrier is that on the gas key, they use YFS bolts instead of true grade 8 bolts. Grade 8 bolts are far stronger than YFS bolts. And the only bolt I've ever had shear off on a carrier was actually on a Bear Creek Arsenal bolt with their YFS screws. I'm not sure why they don't use standard grade 8 bolts, as the difference in price is probably pennies. Now, as far as the actual machining work goes on the BCG, this is another area where it's just okay. If you're looking for it and going over it with a fine-tooth comb, you can definitely find a lot of machining marks on it, a little bit of chatter marks here and there. There's even a spot up here, I'm not sure if you guys can see that on camera, where the nitride coating is basically completely worn off on the back of the carrier itself. Not sure if that was just like a thin spot or something else like that. Something you wouldn't notice unless you had shot it a bunch, because originally it was a very nice black even finish, but that is kind of completely worn off here in the back for some reason. Now, a nice thing about all of BCA's new 7.62x39 carriers is they all come with an enhanced firing pin. All that means is the firing pin shoulder is pushed slightly further back, therefore it protrudes slightly further, meaning that you get a deeper penetration, a harder hit with the firing pin, meaning you have more reliable detonation with hard primers. And very happy to say that we had exactly 0 light primer strikes with the Bear Creek Arsenal Bolt, even when using lightened triggers at times, which is a very good sign. Usually, if you don't have some sort of enhanced firing pin or a full-strength military mil-spec trigger, then you're going to get light primer strikes, especially when you start getting into the reduced weight 3.5, 4-pound triggers that are using reduced pound springs. Usually you're going to have some light primer strikes. Fortunately, Bear Creek Arsenal preempted that by adding an enhanced firing pin, which is going to help with that. Now, I'm not going to say that it's going to run flawless with every trigger, every super light trigger on the market, but for the most part, with the triggers that I have tried in it, it has worked just fine. Now, the bolt in the 7.62x39 actually has 2 different types. There's a Type 1 that has a bolt face depth of 0.125, and I believe this is a Type 2 with a bolt face depth of 0.136. Now, that could be backwards. This could be a Type 1 or a Type 2. Basically, there's 2 different types, and then there's also 6.5 Grendel, which has the same, it has the same parent case, the Russian 220 Russian, I want to say. So 7.62x39, 6.5 Grendel, they both use the same bolt in a AR-15. But again, the bolt face depth, depending on your barrel as well, because the barrel matters in that case. So I believe Bear Creek Arsenal is using the Type 2, which is the deeper 0.136 versus the Type 1, which is a 0.125. Whether or not that's better or worse, there are a lot of arguments online as to that. The problem with all 7.62x39 and 6.5 Grendel bolts on an AR-15 is the way that you fit a much larger case into the same bolt face is by removing a lot of the bolt face. So you have a very, very thin wall at the end that is very prone to cracking. Now, while that is an issue, the main issue is actually the extractor, because you have to remove a good chunk of material from probably the weakest component on an AR-15 to be able to accept a 7.62x39 cartridge. On top of that, 7.62x39 has more energy in the case, I believe 20% more energy than a 5.56. So you're removing material, you're increasing the amount of energy imparted upon the extractor. It's a recipe for broken extractors. There are a couple companies out there that are making truly enhanced extractors with enhanced designs that will enhance their longevity. As far as like a material choice or just a different coating on it, that's not really going to help. The main problem is that in a standard AR-15 bolt, the way to get a 7.62x39 in there is to remove a lot of material, and that puts a lot more stress and makes the extractor a lot more prone to cracking or shearing off. Now, currently on this bolt, the extractor did shear off. If you watch the intro, you know that the extractor did shear off. It sheared off at literally, I want to say, around 970. I think I had a magazine left, and it sheared off at like the last part of the second to last magazine. So it was like a magazine and a half away from finishing the review flawless. All right, so at about the 1,000 round mark, like literally right at the 1,000 round mark, the extractor done sheared off. But of course, with like, again, 30, maybe 40 rounds left in the day, it decided to shear off. Now, that is very common with basically every 7.62x39 extractor on the market. Again, there's only a few that are truly doing something different to make them more reliable, i.e. adding in more material, a totally redesigned geometry, something that will actually increase the longevity versus just a slightly better material choice or a nice coating that really isn't going to help the extractor from shearing off. Now, luckily for me, I had another extractor on hand that was actually sent out by Bear Creek Arsenal as well, because I'm pretty used to 7.62x39 extractors shearing off at this point. And for my mileage, there's really only one way to enhance the life on the extractor on a 7.62x39, and that is to slow down the bolt. And there's a couple different ways to do this. Now, if you guys have watched a lot of my older videos, you'll recognize this piece of crap upper receiver. This is a 10.5-inch 7.62x39 with, again, that very, very heavy barrel in there, and the Bear Creek Arsenal bolt. Now, this one here has blown through 2 extractors. I want to say it's at 5,000 rounds. Currently, it has a Black Rifle Arms Type 2 extractor in here, I want to say, and it's at around 3,000 rounds on this specific extractor. The way that I have achieved that is by using an adjustable gas block to make sure that there is as little gas as necessary to make the system run, therefore slowing down the bolt and saving the life of the most fragile components, which in this case is the extractor. Now, the problem with almost all of Bear Creek Arsenal's guns from the factory is they're a little overgassed to a lot overgassed. So when you add a very overgassed barrel and then a very weak component in the bolt, you're going to get a lot of sheared extractors. Now, again, there is, if you look online, there is, and I'm sure in the comment section as well, there will be several arguments about how to enhance the life of the extractor. Some people say to just swap out a standard 5.56 extractor and that should work. I've heard of that not working for other people. I personally have not tried it. So there's a lot of things you can do and try to increase the life of a 7.62x39 extractor, but it's kind of a suicide mission just by design. You're asking it to handle more pressure or more energy in this case with less material, and it's just not going to work out well for it. For my money, the way that I would enhance the extractor's life personally is to either throw on an adjustable gas block and reduce the gas as much as possible to make sure that you're taking as much strain as you can off of the extractor, or do it start in the back end and add the toughest spring and the heaviest buffer you can to achieve the same result. Though most of the time you're going to get more headroom or more modulation ability with an adjustable gas block, which is probably what I would recommend for almost every 7.62x39 on the market. So longevity definitely is not the strong suit of a 7.62x39 bolt. There are ways to improve it, but it's going to take a little bit of work from you. I'm pretty sure most 7.62x39 barrels out there are going to be fairly overgassed, especially on the budget side. Whether you're getting them from CAC, Bear Creek Arsenal, Faxon, I believe, makes a 7.62x39 barrel, though I have not tried theirs out. Most of the time, if you're going to get one, even a factory gun, I would think about switching out the gas block to an adjustable gas block to enhance its life as much as you can, because when an extractor goes down, you're basically done for the day unless you have another one to swap out. Now, the last component that we need to talk about on the upper is actually going to be this 15-inch MLOK handguard. For the longest time, Bear Creek Arsenal made their handguards a ½ inch too long, and you could not direct thread a muzzle device onto their handguards. However, now they have adjusted all of their sizes, all of their lengths to be appropriate for their barrels so that you don't get that annoying overhang where you either have to shim out your muzzle device or your suppressor way farther than you should have to, or cut off the end of your handguard, which is again something that you should not have to do. So they actually have appropriately lengthed all of their new handguards, which again, back in the day, that was very annoying. You would get a 10.5-inch gun, you would get something like an 11-inch handguard or something, and it would just go like that much further than it needed to, and it stopped you from installing basically any suppressor on your gun, which is again very annoying. Now, as far as the overall design of the handguard goes, for a budget handguard, it's actually not that bad. So starting at the back here, we have our mounting system. The mounting system on, again, their new handguards. Another reason why I wanted to try out this upper receiver specifically was it had their new style of handguard on it. So it has 8 bolts that mount directly into your barrel. Now, that is good for you, the end user, because that is a very strong mounting system. You have the handguard directly mounted into your barrel nut, which means that it is, in theory, as long as the barrel nut is torqued down properly, never going to shift on you. The bad part of that is it's harder to get on and off if you wanted to switch stuff out for some reason. And also, if you wanted to assemble one of these at home, you probably need some barrel shims to ensure that you get it lined up properly with the proper amount of torque. Now, from the factory, this handguard is actually clocked a little bit too far by about a degree or two. Not a big deal, but if you're super OCD, then that would probably bug you. For me, not a big deal, but again, this one here, even if I try and finagle it a little bit, it's still overclocked just a little bit, like by, again, a degree or two. Now, getting into the mounting system, this is, of course, a MLOK handguard. You actually have 6 or 7 sides of MLOK on the middle section. And if you look at this handguard for long enough, you'll notice there are huge chunks of this handguard where there is absolutely no machining done whatsoever, which is, it's definitely a stronger design if you just leave all of the material there. but it is also, again, cheaper, easier, faster, less machining time, which means they can pump them out faster and cheaper. Now, the top rail section, for some reason, well, it kind of makes sense on this build, but we'll talk about it in just a minute. The top rail section on here is removed. Most of the Picatinny section, you have like 6 sections in the back and then 6 sections up front. Now, we also have QD points near the end and the beginning of the handguard. Usually, when I'm running a sling, I would put my QD point right here. However, on this build, because the barrel is so heavy, my Grovtec Saber or Sentinel slings, they don't go in because the barrel is so heavy and so close to the rail that it will not allow most QDs to actually fit into the front points. So if you want to use a sling with QDs, you got to either run all the way out or either use an MLOK or an MLOK QD rail point or something like this. This is the Grovtec Side Rider that I use, which goes on the top little Picatinny rail sections back here, which is probably the only thing you would ever mount on them. Now, the rail itself is actually very slim, especially in the middle without the Picatinny rail sections. On top, you can quite easily reach all of your fingers around. So depending on how you like your handguards, if you like a really slim handguard, you're actually gonna like this one just fine. Now, they didn't skimp on the material either. While it is slim, the rail sections or the thickness of the material on the rail is fairly thick. So overall, while they did try to remove some material from the top, overall, I would say that this is still a fairly heavy rail combined with a very heavy barrel and a very heavy upper receiver and a bolt with an extra steel piece hanging off the side, which means that this is a very, very heavy upper receiver. Now, let's go ahead and take off the handguard, which is, again, one of the more annoying parts, and show you guys the barrel, because the barrel is, again, one of the more interesting parts of the build. Then once you get your 8 set screws removed, you can simply pull off your 15-inch MLOK rail and expose the very, very chunky barrel. Now, the barrel profile itself is very simple. You have a 1-inch straight taper, basically a bull barrel as big as you can get and still fit a AR-15 barrel nut over top of it. And then you have a straight taper to your gas block journal or your gas block shoulder here. And then you have the barrel itself is actually thicker than the gas block, if you can tell on camera. Then you have a .750 gas block journal that is a straight taper straight to the end. As far as heavy barrels go in an AR-15, this is about as heavy as they get without being a full-on bull barrel with a rifle-length gas system. Like I said, I believe the barrel by itself is 3.2 pounds, which means the upper receiver in total is, I believe, 5.5 pounds, 6 pounds for just the upper receiver. Now, as you'll notice, this is a carbine length gas system. If it was a mid-length gas system, it would be even heavier, of course, because you would have that thicker profile even further out on the gun. But as far as it goes right now with the carbine gas system, that's kind of the appropriate for 7.62x39. It's a little different than 5.56 in that regard, though again, I would recommend having an adjustable gas block. Now, the barrel is parkerized, which is again a bottom tier coating. Basically, it's fine. You have a phosphate gas block, double set screw design. The rear set screw is inside of a dimple on the barrel, which is quite nice, and it's an easy thing to visually check because the rear set screw is quite a bit deeper than the front set screw. And I have not messed around with this whatsoever. Didn't have anything come loose on me or anything else like that. But what do you get with this heavy of a barrel? And you get accuracy, actually. Now, you do sacrifice that when it comes to weight, but you do get to print very nice little groups. Now, these are done at 50 yards, though I will still read out the MOA for you. So this first 5-round group here on the right, or on your left, I suppose, this one here is right at 0.75 MOA. This one here is right at 1 MOA. Now, this is extrapolated out in MOA, so it's not inches. This is about center to center. This is like a 1/4 inch, honestly, so I'm hedging it a little bit against the rifle. Now, this is only using 123 grain Red Army standard ammunition, their heavy lacquered ammo. I have gotten 1 MOA groups out of this heavy barrel 7.62x39, as well as the, don't fall over, as well as the 10.5-inch 7.62x39. Something about the insanely heavy profile tends to lend itself to accuracy with these specific loads. Now, if you're using like Wolf Army Standard, you'll get around 1.5 to 2 MOA. And actually this group right here is one of the worst groups that I shot out of it. This is the Hornady Black 123 grain, so it's the polymer tipped ammunition, which in theory has a much nicer BC than your standard 123 grain load. It really shot at about like 2.5 MOA, which isn't all that great, especially for a match ammunition. We also shot, this is 220 grain Subsonics through it, which is why you can see the impacts are much lower. Even at 50 yards, the point of impact is quite a bit different. Now, I'm not sure if these are actually .311 bullets or if they're .308 bullets, but even these super heavy subsonic rounds shot at about 2 MOA, which for a 1 in 10 twist barrel is not that bad. Now, something else to show real quick, this is the zeroing target. So this is my first shot, and then I adjusted using the mil-based reticle, the Griffin mil reticle in the Primary Arms GLX 2.5 to 10, and then I adjusted to here, and this is 4 rounds again in the exact same hole basically. So the performance of the barrel in terms of accuracy is very, very good, especially with specific loadings like you're going to be sub MOA all day. If I pick this first page up again, the first 14 rounds, the 4 from the initial 0 group, and then these as well, come in at like 1.5 MOA for 14 rounds. So I would say that this gun is sub MOA and is sub 2 MOA for extended volumes of fire even. Now, this was at the end of the day, on the very last day of shooting, right at about 1,000 rounds, probably about 1,030 with the accuracy testing. And again, these groups were shot out of a warm barrel, not an overly hot barrel, but definitely a warm barrel. We didn't give it all that long to cool down before we shot these groups. And it, again, the accuracy out of this cheap of a gun, because remember, this entire complete upper assembly cost $250. The accuracy is phenomenal. The weight is the polar opposite of that, of course, or the vice versa of that. Of course, it's very accurate, but it's also incredibly heavy. Now, I've also taken this upper receiver out to 500 yards with just a Primary Arms 1 to 4x scope, and it performed just fine. At 400 yards, it was basically a laser beam, and then at 500 yards in the wind, it was a bit of a crapshoot, but 7.62x39 in general does not perform too well in the wind. Incredible. So this is going to be one of those upper receivers that has a lot of things in both the pros and the cons column. It's a very inexpensive upper receiver with some pretty nice features. There are things that people are going to like and dislike about it, whether you think the Gen 2 side charger is cool or if it's dumb. The accuracy is undeniably very good. The weight is undeniably very high. So for some people, this is going to absolutely be loved or hated depending on which features of it you like. Now, if you're somebody who's looking for a cheap 7.62x39 for home defense, self-defense, duty grade rifle, I would say absolutely not. The extractors are basically ticking time bombs. They will break at some point. They will. And you do not know when that is. I've had extractors break at 300 rounds, 500 rounds, 700 rounds, and 1,000 rounds. And currently one has about 3,000 rounds on it. But that, again, the more I shoot that, it will eventually break. Now, 7.62x39 used to be incredibly cheap. Now it's about the same price as 5.56, so there's not really an argument to saving a ton of money over 5.56. Even so, people like myself and others probably have stockpiles of 7.62 by 39. But again, for serious applications, I would take a Bear Creek Arsenal 5.56 over a 7.62 by 39, even if the level of quality is the same in both of those upper receivers. The design of the 5.56 extractor is not going to break as fast as the 7.62 by 39, even if we're talking parts of identical quality just by design. The 5.56 is a stronger design within the AR-15 platform. So then the flip side of that is, what would you buy it for? And well, for some people, it would make a very good pig stick or hunting gun of some sort. It is very accurate with very cheap ammunition. It could also be a fun gun, a target gun. Again, if you're somebody who has a lot of 7.62 by 39 laying around, then it can be a fun, very inexpensive option for you. Again, I would not put it in a serious use case, but again, it could be fun. Now, the gun itself, as I mentioned before, it is overgassed, and I would recommend putting on either an adjustable gas block or going the heaviest buffer and spring combo you can. On top of that, a muzzle brake definitely wouldn't hurt either in terms of its fun. So if you just wanted a fun, cheap gun, even with some of those other accessories, you're looking at a $300 total price tag, which is very, very inexpensive. Now, as far as I'm concerned with the upper receiver, I do think it is a fun gun to shoot. It has a lot more recoil than, well, I shouldn't say a lot more. It has a little bit more recoil than 5.56, again, 20, 30% maybe, and this one here is a little bit overgassed. So there's a little bit more drama when it comes to shooting it. So when you're able to run it quickly, it makes you feel a little bit more accomplished, if you will, versus 5.56, which is, again, has very little recoil. As like a practice gun, when you go from this, which is a very heavy gun with a lot of recoil, to 5.56, which is going to be lighter with less recoil, it makes it even easier. So for like a practice gun roll, or again, for me just testing and evaluating different products, it makes a lot of sense. For you though, in your specific circumstances, maybe, maybe not. I'm not really sure. But with all of that out of the way, guys, I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know what you guys think of this Bear Creek Arsenal 7.62 by 39 Gen 2 side charging upper receiver. And with all that out of the way, guys, thank you once again for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace off.